Trifecta for nonprofit finance, the integrated FP&A and accounting team. Excuse me. I'm Mike Mooney. I manage business development at Carlson Management Consulting. Many of you received invitations from me to attend today, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Greatly appreciated. We do have a lot of great content for nonprofit accounting and finance professionals. But before we do get things started, I'd like to let everyone know that we will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. If you do have questions during the presentation, please note in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom meeting screen, and feel free to enter any and all questions there during the presentation, and I'll be certain that they are covered if possible during the question and answer. I will note today's webinar is being recorded, so it will be sent to all of the attendees. If you have any colleagues who you think would benefit from this session, feel free to forward that to them as well. My contact information will be available at the end of the webinar, and if you have any follow-up questions or would like a personalized demo, please don't hesitate to reach out. As for today's agenda, we will cover the following: introductions, an overview of Carlson Management Consulting, leveraging dimensionality in Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights, complementary KPIs, the power and ease of reporting and dashboards with Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights, and one of the hottest topics across industries, automated integrations. And to wrap everything up, as mentioned, we will have a Q&A session to address all of your questions. And as we do have quite a few in attendance today, if in the instance we don't get to your question, I will certainly be happy to follow up with you after the fact. For today's webinar, we are joined by our Vice President, Kevin O'Brien, and Joe Giorgio, Senior Associate, who will lead the discussion and guide us through the best-in-class solutions, Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights. Kevin O'Brien's extensive accounting, finance, and implementation experience brings invaluable credibility when presenting transformational solutions to our clients. Kevin is responsible for the Central Region Office of Carlson and further driving growth of our corporate performance management solution and ERP services, and as well as our service line of business, offering a strategic facilitated project management approach resulting in successful implementations of CPM and ERP solutions. He is a certified public accountant in the state of Ohio and is, of course, Adaptive Insight certified. Joe Giorgio is our Senior Associate. Joe understands firsthand the challenges and rewards of an accounting and finance department. After receiving his bachelor's degree in accounting from Siena College and a master's in accounting from Strayer University, Joe went on to spend 7 years working for a social services nonprofit organization. While there, he assumed progressive responsibility in the finance department by starting out as a bookkeeper and working his way up to accounting manager. As an overseer of several of the organization's financial tasks, such as AR and AP processing, he also became well-versed in the area of financial reporting. In 2013, Joe started as a project consultant implementing Abila and micro workflow modules. Now Joe implements leading software solutions, including Intacct and Nexonia. Joe has run software user groups, regional training, and customized on-site and remote trainings for clients. One of the favorite parts of his job is being able to help organizations solve real everyday problems. As for Carlson Management Consulting, we were founded in 2010, and our foundation lies in our Adaptive Insights and Sage Intacct practice, but also has offerings across a multitude of best-in-class cloud solutions, which includes DataBlend, which we'll chat about today, which is our iPaaS or integration platform as a service, as well as Nexonia, which I had mentioned for timesheets and expense reporting, Avalara, which is a tax automation solution, as well as our outsourced services to organizations of all sizes and industries. Carlson is a 6-time top partner award winner with Adaptive Insights, most recently earning the recognition of Partner of the Region for the Americas. We've also been ranked 3 years in a row on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing privately held companies, as well as 4 years in a row on the Boston Business Journal Fast 50. These accolades are simply a direct indication of our customer success, as our reputation is truly determined by each successful implementation. We have 4 offices located in Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, and Ohio, and a team of consultants nationwide. I would like to point out that each member of our consulting team comes to Carlson with not only a deep technological background, but also more specifically a finance background, bringing financial best practices to each implementation, making Carlson the cloud financial solution expert. And prior to handing it off to Kevin and Joe, I did want to point out and sort of to provide everyone a cross-section of recent nonprofit customers. While we work with a wide variety of companies at varying stages and industries, our firm has worked with over 50 nonprofit firms, bringing a true understanding for all aspects of the challenges you're faced with on a daily basis. And with that being said, I'd like to hand it off to Kevin, who will kick things off with the Carlson ecosystem. All yours, Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. The Carlson ecosystem, we thought we'd provide an overview of what today is about and kind of a roadmap, if you will. And we will recap with this near the end of the program as well. But if we start down at the bottom with Sage Intacct, and Joe will be the lead in sharing some examples there. Sage Intacct is a cloud-based accounting system, a world-leading system for ERP, general ledger, receivables, payables, and such. Joe will give several examples. Adaptive Insights, to the left, is a cloud-based, award-winning budgeting, forecasting, planning, and reporting system. So we'll start with that. The picture we have here is the system we actually use at Carlson. So today's content will be around these 2 areas, Sage Intacct and Adaptive, with DataBlend, which is in the center, is the integration platform. Now you also see Salesforce and Nexonia in the top and at the right. You probably or possibly do not have those, but you have other systems. And the goal is to create a system that incorporates all your key areas, all your key pieces, that's fully integrated so that you have real-time data on a timely basis so you can make effective decisions. So we'll get into a little bit on Sage Intacct, Adaptive, and how that integration fits, and can certainly advise you on how to integrate those other pieces. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Joe, and he will continue the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. So I'd first like to talk about leveraging the dimensionality features or setup that Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights both have. That's probably the first thing that makes them integrate or makes them work so nicely together, is that they both use dimensions instead of a string-based structure of your chart of accounts. So the benefit to the dimensionality is that you can slice and dice your data in many different ways. So for example, you can run a P&L by department, program, cost center, grant, project, even without an extremely large chart of accounts. You don't need separate GL codes to book programming expenses for each of your different programs or your different grants. You simply pick the program and it will slice and dice through your data, finding everything that was coded to that program or grant if you're coding it to your different grants. The next benefit is that you can effortlessly scale as your organization grows. So for example, you get 3, 4, 5, 10 new grants every year, or maybe you want to start up a new program here and there to keep yourself able to serve your constituents. You need to evolve. So Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights both will allow you to grow because of that dimensionality. You just add a new program, add a new grant. It's as simple as that, without having to add a whole bunch of new GL codes or any other codes to go along with those grants or programs. And in turn, that allows you to have a more efficient database. It lets the system work smoothly, and you won't see a slowdown as your organization grows. So the last bullet point I'd like to point out before we jump into Intacct is that there is a difference between the matrix and the string, which I've identified. And Intacct actually has built in custom relationships that allow you to mimic a benefit to the string chart of accounts. So that benefit being able to have code combinations to make sure that if program supplies aren't allowed for this one grant, that someone can't use that. So that is being addressed in Intacct through these custom relationships. And that's what I'd like to show you at this point. So I'm going to jump into Intacct, and I will do a journal entry because everyone loves journal entries, right? So as you are creating a new journal entry, I'm not going to go into the boring details of everything, how to enter a journal entry, but for example, I have linked this GL account to the restriction code. So it happened really fast. You might not have noticed that once I chose the GL account, it automatically populated the restriction. Well, while this is interesting for the for-profit world, I think it's even more powerful for the not-for-profit world. This specific example right here is allowing me as an implementer to set you up to have every expense automatically be code to unrestricted or without donor restriction, whatever it is that you wanna call the code. But that is the benefit to these custom relationships that makes it easier to maintain, easier to enter, and to eliminate the need for having to worry about miscoding because it automatically will populate for anyone, even if the person doesn't understand what a restriction is. Another benefit that you have is through the same customer relationship is not maybe a one-to-one relationship, but a one-to-many relationship. So for example, the counseling services, if counseling services is only available in 2 sites, we can set up that relationship where they would only see those 2 sites versus a youth center, they have all 4 sites or maybe only 2 sites. We can set that up very easily. Oops, I'm in the wrong field right here. By looking at a GL code, once the relationship is set up, any end user can come in that has permissions, can come in and say, oh yeah, I want to actually link this department with this and this site. Simple as that. Click save. And now, once I refresh, once I pick that new department, you will see only those 2 sites as opposed to, again, something else where you have all 4 sites. So that's where you can get the best of both worlds. As I'm referencing down on this last bullet point, matrix and string chart of accounts, you can actually get the benefits to both without giving up anything. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Joe. I will now share my screen. And you should be seeing Adaptive Insights now. So this is an expense sheet. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept. Joe talked a little bit about slicing and dicing data. He talked about accounts and strings and dimensions and such. And what I think one of the great things is that Adaptive and Sage Intacct fit hand in glove in that they're architected very similarly in a matrix structure, if you will, that Joe spoke to. Now, specific to what we might see in Adaptive, it might be something along the following lines. If we look over here on the left, we'll see the natural chart of accounts, which is often, one of the segments in an account, right? So we'll take that part and we would bring in your actual chart of accounts or whatever the case may be. In the upper right is what we call the level structure, or you might think of it as the organization structure. And in this example, you can see we have several departments here. We also have a G&A area. This could be set up to the specifications of the user and would, of course, again, mirror what's in Sage Intacct. What's nice about this is if I go into one department, I'll see more of a subset of that. And I see just simply one department and I can work from there. So I might be a user who just works in department 1 and I can look at my piece of the world. When we talk about things like slicing and dicing, I can explore these cells and dig into the greater detail of how they were budgeted. And again, I'm focusing more on the budget area. And this starts to create a breakdown of where my personnel dollars are coming from. So I'm focusing more in the forecasting and budgeting area, whereas Joe is focusing more in the actuals area. Now, what's also nice about this is if I like to consume the information in a different way, I can flip-flop the accounts and the departments. So if I look at the same sheet, but with a different view, I now have the departments down the side and the salary and wages account up here. So this allows me to look at by department what my budgeted salaries and wages are. And similarly, we would be able to see the actuals coming in. Just to give you an example here, you can see department 1, 2, and 3 have personnel expense, whereas the other departments don't. if I go over here to the personnel sheet, which is a place that populates a census of our employees, what we find is obviously people put employees in different departments, they allocate those across departments, and they want to be budgeted appropriately. So what we can do here is see Kathy is in Department 1. I can move her down to Department 5 and hit save. And if I go back over to the other worksheet that I just showed you and refresh, this will resend and refresh. We immediately have the impact of that change. And this becomes effective in that we can move things around quickly and easily, we can rerun reports quickly and easily, and we can run what-if scenarios, which I'll expand on in a few minutes. Another example, Joe spoke of dimensionality. So this is more of a cube, a three-dimensional worksheet, if you will. And notice it has accounts down the side. It has the levels, the departments that I showed you in the previous example, but now what it also includes is programs. So I've got all my programs here. And needless to say, we like to be able to break things down in different ways by programs or projects or whatever. And Adaptive allows you to do that. And most importantly, to mirror what is in Sage Intacct. Now, for example, if I wanted to take one of the accounts, like foundation grants, and I wanted to, or corporate grants, and I wanted to pull it across, I'm going to go ahead and move this up to the top level of the company, the organization here. And then I'm going to take the program and I'm going to pull the foundation grants over. And what it will do is flip-flop the worksheet, and let me try that again, and show things by department or by program. So now I can see the breakdown by program, A, B, C, D, and can make analysis in that way. So very flexible. The dimensions, in this example, we use the programs, very flexible and easy to use. Here's the examples of the programs that I use. And when Joe provides data from Sage Intacct into Adaptive, those programs, those dimensions will be automatically updated. And with that, I'd like to hand it back over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Kevin. So the next thing we want to talk about is collaboration. The key benefit to having systems integrated is the collaboration, not only between those systems, but between the individuals or departments or sub-departments using those systems. So the example that we're talking about today, the one that we're talking about at least in depth today, is eliminating the silos between FP&A and accounting. So by integrating Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights, it is helping with that collaboration, because the integration automatically will be bringing that data, those actuals from Sage Intacct into Adaptive Insights. There is no need for a FP&A person to go to a finance person or an accounting person and say, can you give me a trial balance for this month? Can you give me a detailed general ledger report for this month? All that information can be automatically brought into Adaptive Insights from Sage Intacct, so the analysis by the FP&A team can be done. So one of the key benefits that Intacct gives you, specifically related to collaboration just within Intacct, is called the Sage Intacct Collaborate feature. It can be linked to the Salesforce chatter functionality, and it does function the same way, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a standalone option, and I will show you how that can work in a minute. Another thing that you could do with Sage Intacct is the set up self-service reports. So you, if there is someone that is a user, you can create these reports for them, give them access to just what you want them to have access to, and then they can run it whenever they want. Because Sage Intacct is where you are transacting, any reports pulled by them in Sage Intacct will be real-time, up-to-date within that second. If someone cuts a check, and someone needs to run a report and it's related to the cash, they will actually see that immediately. So by giving people self-service reports, it helps with that collaboration. As a former AP clerk, I got questions all the time about invoices being paid or where something was coded. So self-service reports are tremendously helpful for people to answer their own questions. And the last thing is dashboards. You might have some people that are not as technologically advanced as others, so they kind of need a little hand holding. And the best way to do that is to set up dashboards for them, put all their reports, put all their graphs in one place. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper on the dashboards and what you can do with them and graphs and why you'd use them later on in this presentation. But just keep in mind that those dashboards do allow you to communicate with users or other people within your organization. So before I turn it over to Kevin, I'm just going to pop back into Intacct and use a use case, a pretty common use case example. So let's say you are looking at a trial balance. So I'm going to just pick this year, run a trial balance, and you're just scanning through it and you're saying, huh, you know what? This doesn't make sense. Why are the legal fees $15,000? That seems kind of high to me. Drill into it. And you could see all the individual bills that were created that add up to that $15,000. And you could say, huh, there seems to be a lot in March. Let me look at this one, this 1250. And click and drill into it. It pulls up that transaction. If I scroll down, you can see, oh, look, someone already asked about this. Looks like a duplicate. Can you look into it? And answered no, because the item worked out so well, we bought another one. So for, I guess, this specific legal fees doesn't make so much sense for the item working out. So you can question if the person was even looking at the right thing. So to respond to something, you can either start another string or you can respond to this and say, you know what? This is for legal fees. What item are you referring to? So as you do that, and if I scroll down, I can click comment to post it. Before I go into how people will be notified, you also can post files and links to other things if you choose. And you can also follow a message in case you wanted to just follow this and see what people's responses are. You can just click follow without actually making a response yourself. So once that's done, the person can opt into email notifications. Otherwise, what they will see is they'll see a little bubble here and see all their messages. And I can see, oh, this does not ring a bell. Can you investigate that? And then you could say, oh, looks like a duplicate. So let me click into that and it'll bring me to the actual invoice. And again, you could see, and you can see the messages and you can see the invoice. If there were any attachments, you can actually drill into the attachment too. So that's how the collaborate function works. Again, you can opt into email notifications, and as an administrator, you don't have to give everyone access to be able to comment on different transactions or records. You can do these same transactions on a vendor. So if I just quickly, the last thing I want to show you, if I quickly go to a vendor, you could see the same thing. As you scroll all the way down, you will see same thing where you have an opportunity to post something about that vendor. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Let me share my screen again. Okay, we should be back into Adaptive now. So let's talk a little bit about other forms of collaboration, and I'll give you a few different examples. So the first one is simply the level access that I spoke of earlier. So for example, I might be working in Department 1, and perhaps, you know, Joe might be working in Department 2, and maybe Mike is in charge of all operations, and we can work in our respective departments. What I can do over here when I'm working on my budget numbers is I can start to footnote. And so if I look over here, right in this cell here, if you're able to see this small red triangle, that represents a footnote. And what I'm doing here is saying, you know what, I know Mike is going to ask about this, so I'm going to put in a footnote. And those footnotes will roll up. They will also flow through into the reports. So that's a form of collaboration that saves us a little bit of time, a little bit of that back and forth, very analogous to the way Joe presented his example. Another form of collaboration is workflow. So think of us all in these 10 departments that I've outlined. And maybe Mike is running our budget area, and Joe and I and several other people are submitting our budgets, department heads, stakeholders, if you will. So notice here, all the departments are putting together their budget, perhaps for 2019, for example. And if I'm in Department 1, perhaps I may have submitted my budget, and the person responsible may either approve or reject my budget. Now, if they approve it, it is now up to date and part of the budget. But if they reject it, it will be kicked back to me with perhaps footnotes or whatever, and then I can come back and I can resubmit it. And then once we are good to go, it can be approved. So each of us can do that within our departments, which provides one common source of the truth. It eliminates spreadsheets moving around. It allows us a very quick and easy view of where things stand. The third example I'll share is around self-serve reporting, and Joe spoke a little on that, and we'll go into a little more depth with reporting later. But the idea that people can get in and access their own reports. They don't have to come to finance or accounting to get the information they need. They would only have access to their appropriate levels, and we can also manage what reports they have control of. We also have some dashboard capability, and I'll speak to that a little bit later in the presentation about how that might fit in with Sage Intacct as well. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Joe to continue.
Thanks, Kevin. So next topic is forecasting. So forecasting is not what Intacct was built to do. Intacct has been built to be a source of financial record where you transact, where you are doing your day-to-day, paying your bills, sending out invoices, that sort of thing. But Sage Intacct has decided that instead of them trying to go out and create a forecasting tool and building that into their solution, that they're going to partner with the best. And that's what they do across the board. That's why they integrate so well with Salesforce, with Adaptive, with many, many other systems. They look for the best in that area. If there's already someone there doing something that needs to be accomplished, Intacct partners with them. So basically, the whole point of that was to indicate that the reports, any analysis that you're doing in Sage Intacct really is geared more towards looking at current, real-time, up-to-date, during the month balances and activity to kind of analyze where you're at during the close. Is your revenue as high as you expect it to be? Oh, no, it's not. That means we probably didn't book something. Let's go look at that. Are your insurance balances kind of low for the month? Oh, that's right. We didn't get the bill. It must have got lost in the mail. Let's follow up on that. So different analysis like that is done in Sage Intacct, but actually forecasting, looking to the future, that's really done in Adaptive. And the best way to do that is to use the data in Intacct, send it over to Adaptive, and let Adaptive use that data to forecast out the future. And the best way to do that is use DataBlend to bring in those actuals into Adaptive. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Joe. And I will share my screen once again. So to pick up on Joe's comments, he spoke of closing the books in Sage Intacct. The idea is we want to bring the data across. And with the dimensionality and the architecture, that's an efficient process and can be done through DataBlend. So imagine this in Adaptive. Let's talk about the concept of version. So the version that I'm showing here is an actuals version. And if you're able to see the numbers, they are green in nature. And this would happen on a regular basis. It could happen on a monthly basis or more frequently, as often as you would like. So now I've got the actuals in, but those are sourced very much from what Sage Intacct produced. What I also have is another version. And the versions are here in the upper right, and I've got a drop down, and I've got several options. So the actuals version is one option. I also have an annual budget. So this is the budget I might have put in, at the end of the year or in a calendar year that I locked down for the year. And that's the budget that I will report out of throughout the year. Joe spoke a little bit about that, and it has all that detail. It has more granular detail of all the composition of the personnel that I showed you earlier and things of that nature. When we talk about forecasting, that typically becomes a combination, of course, of budgets and actuals. And people use different terminology around forecasting, but that's usually where we land. So if I get into the forecast version, and we'll use the term a rolling forecast, it starts to look something like this. It's got a combination in this calendar year organization of 3 months of actuals and then 9 months of budget. Furthermore, we can start to extend this further. So this is going through the current fiscal year, but notice it's also going into several subsequent fiscal years as well. So all of a sudden now we have a longer term plan. Now, there are individual months for each of these. I just don't have them displayed right now, but all I would have to do is just set it up to display those, and that's as simple as going over here, and I can change the display. If I want to see my detail for 2018 by month, you will see that start to populate here. So what now happens is I can start to look at the actuals. I can start to look at the trends I've developed over the first few months, and then I can start to make updates accordingly. So if I jump over here and I'm back to that role that I've been in as the Department 1 individual, I can now go in here and make my updates to my forecast based upon the information that I see. And each of us can go in individually and do that, and then we have an up-to-date reforecast. When I show you reporting, I'll show you we can slice whatever periods we want. But now I can see the actuals and the budget. Furthermore, we can do these on a regular basis. So when I look over here, I see a Q1 forecast. I could have a Q2 forecast. I could have it by individual months, April and May and June. We can have a long-term forecast version. I spoke to that here. It can either be a bottoms up, which is what I would call this one, or it can be a tops down, or we can do both versions and compare them to see how they merge and come together. What's also very effective here is that we can do what if scenarios, the best case, the worst case. What if our funding goes up or goes down, or what if we add this program, or what if we change our staffing? And we can create several different scenarios, line them up, see what they look like, and see where they go. And I will show that a little bit in the reporting area. Let me give you one example of a report here where I do compare the scenarios. I'll show this to you in a few minutes as well, but this is where I can compare different scenarios. We see this happen in conference rooms on the fly where people are making changes, like that personnel change I made for Kathy and put her in a different department. That can be done real time simply by hitting refresh. And with that, Joe, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So the next thing I want to talk about is complementary drivers and KPIs. So the first thing I want to mention is kind of what I already mentioned about Intacct, Sage Intacct partnering with Best in Breed. Sage Intacct has a partner and actually a client, GuideStar, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. They have worked with GuideStar to come up with these KPIs and drivers that they're looking at, that GuideStar is looking at, that GuideStar recommends donors look at when they're deciding who to give money to. So they have partnered with GuideStar, and they've come up with a not-for-profit digital board book, which gives you some predetermined KPIs that you might want to start looking at. Otherwise, or should I say, in addition, GuideStar has their own subscription service that they will add on top of that allow you to compare your numbers to other organizations that are doing similar work. So you kind of can see where you're at in comparison to other organizations. And this is what donors are doing. So if you're looking at it before the donors even get to look at it, you can address anything in a timely manner and allow you to get more funding from those donors. So just an example of one that I'd like to talk about is related to donations. So you have some KPIs is maybe just total donations. What is the total dollar amount that you're pulling in? Is that going up? Is that trending up? Is that trending down? Where are you compared to last year or last quarter, or last month? You can also look at non-financial data. So the number of donors. So you can have Intacct automatically calculate the number of donors that you have simply by determining which one of your funding sources are donors versus grantors, whatever the case may be, constituents. whatever you want to label them as, Intacct will say, oh, well, you want to add up just the donors? Here's the number of donors. And it'll allow you to look at that and track that over a period of time. And then you can marry those two numbers and get an average donation. So you can set Intacct up to give you a KPI number that takes the total donations and divides it by your total donors to give you an average donation amount. And in turn, it also can give you the change to see, is your average donation going up over time or going down over time? So before I turn it over to Kevin to indicate how that can flow over into Adaptive, I'm going to jump into Intacct again and just give you some examples. So it's really easy for me to show you these examples on a dashboard because they are the most common place that people like to put them, because it is the easiest way to show someone multiple KPIs at once without having it be what some people, not us accountants, but what some people might think is a boring old spreadsheet. So I'll just pop over to the fundraising efficiency and show you that one. And this is giving you a little preview of the dashboards and what they look like. So you can have all these KPIs flagged around the side, so you can actually see what are your donations, the average donation, the number of donations, your fundraising expense, all these numbers simply on this screen, and you can see the trends. Number of donors going up, going down, how is it trending? So that one I already talked about a little bit about. So let me move on to another one that I haven't talked about yet. There's going to be two more I want to talk about. One is some of these outcomes down here. So let's pick a foundation. So again, these KPIs are coming from what GuideStar looks at, what GuideStar recommends donors look at. So for foundations, number of applications reviewed, number of awards issued, number of volunteer hours, average award amount. So we can change the date here. I don't know if I have anything all the way back that far, but you change the date here and you can get the new number and see how it looks. So apparently I haven't booked any award amount. So this is a good example to not only for other, let's say the fundraising department, or for the grant givers to look at, but also for the finance department to look at and to say, oh, wait, we didn't book any revenue this month. Something's not right. So these KPIs can be used in many, many ways. Just the last one I want to show you is the NFP one that I have here. So the NFP one has client served, meals served, volunteer hours, program expenses. So those are some of these metrics that you can look at, and you can have them flow over to Adaptive. So an Adaptive can use that in many different ways. So at this point, I'm going to send it back over to Kevin so he can show you how some of these numbers can relate into Adaptive.
Great. Thank you, Joe. All right, we're back to Adaptive. So let's start with the principle or the concept of bringing in actuals, examining trends, and moving forward to reforecast. And the concept here is similar to what I have outlined here, even to the point where I can start to do things like create spark lines so I can get a better view of where things stand. I'll see the spark lines appear here in just a minute when this refreshes. But let's take Joe's example while this is refreshing. You can start to see trend lines here. And let's take Joe's example of the donations, the average donations. What he's essentially doing is taking total donations divided by number of donors to get an average. So division, obviously. What we can do then is turn around and take those averages and start to forecast and essentially use multiplication, meaning flipping it around. And in that example, it would be something along the lines of, our objective is X dollars in total donations, but those elements are, of course, the number of donors in the average donation. So we could perhaps start with that average donation, forecast our number of donors, and see if we get to the number. We understand, of course, how to change those variables, either the average donation, are we trying to increase that? Are we trying to increase the number of donors, or how are we going to approach that? So it allows us to take more of a strategic approach, and we can reforecast. And of course, those numbers would feed into the statement of operations or statement of income or things of that nature. Now, let me give you another example here. Joe shared some examples on volunteer hours, program expenses. Here might be one around membership. And the reason I wanted to show you this is just simply the mechanics of taking financial data and non-financial data, very similar to to a few of Joe's examples in running mathematical operations. So now we've got something with membership dues. And what you can see happening here, if you're able to see these small triangles, these are formulas and formula logic. So what's happening is we're doing memberships and things like run rates and things of that nature to run numbers, to run KPIs and things of that nature. Very easy to do. So these accounts are what we call custom accounts, meaning they're not GL accounts, but they're placeholders and they behave very similar to GL accounts. So that allows us to run the numbers we need, run the computations we need. What we always talk about in this area is just to be very cautious and do a good job of selecting the right KPIs and don't pick too many. Pick the ones that are the most meaningful and make sure you get all the way down to the root. It's easy to have 40 or 50 KPIs that all start to run together at some point. So we always say make it a strategic exercise, then these tools allow you to execute. Joe showed a bit on dashboarding and I will do the same. And I take it more from a forecasting side of things here. I think the idea is that Sage Intacct Adaptive touch but do not overlap. So this would allow us to look at some of the forecasting side in a very similar manner to the nice dashboards that Joe was able to show you. And with that, Joe, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we're going to not jump into it. We're going to talk a little bit more about reports and dashboards now. So now that you've had a little taste, we want to really dive. So these reports and dashboards. So again, most of them are going to be used in Intacct to support the month-end close to make sure that you have the numbers look appropriate for the month. And then they'll get sent into Adaptive for more analysis and projecting and forecasting. You also look at some KPIs, digital board book that I referred to, or your own dashboard that you use to create a board book for your own board. So the report that you put together every quarter or maybe month, hopefully you don't have to do it that frequently, but I've known some that have, for your board to give them an analysis of where you're at. Some of these things you can do in Intacct through the dashboarding to put multiple reports and graphs in one place. So the main reason that you'd want to take advantage of the dashboards is to allow you to communicate with the end user or with the person that's going to be looking at the information, whether it be a board member, a grantor, any sort of funder, or even someone external, like the bank. Any of these people, you might want to be able to communicate with them different ways. Maybe they don't like a standard report, statement activities, statement of functional expense. Maybe they don't like that. Maybe they want graphs. So this is where using Intacct, Sage Intacct, and Adaptive Insight to their strength of communicating to people in the way they need to be communicated to. So some examples that I'd like to show you briefly, because I do see that we are running low on time. Some of the big ones is cash. So cash is always something you want to look at immediately. Someone cut a check, you want to know right away. So if you're looking at a cash number, you don't want to know what that number was yesterday or last week or last month. So you would cash analysis. So you might want to look at a dashboard that looks like this. This dashboard will give you different ways to look at cash. So you can have it as a statement of cash flows. You can have it as a line graph that it will give it to you over time, or breaking out by the different funds you have or by the different bank accounts you have. Or again, another standard report that gives you the balances by month or quarter, and then the trend of how it's moving. So you can see you have the direct method, indirect methods, all of those are supported within Intacct, Sage Intacct, and you can put them on different dashboards. Another interesting dashboard that I have an example of is one that maybe a controller might want to look at, that gives you an idea of where you're at during the close. And again, this example you're going to see allows you to look at data in a couple different ways. So please bear with me. I got a message that my internet connection is slow. So it does look like I am having issues with my internet. I'm going to turn this over to Kevin, let him continue, and if I can resolve my internet issues, I will come back and show you a couple more of what I wanted to show.
And actually, at this time, it might be just a good opportunity. I did have one question come in on a private message specific to best-in-class selection, software selection process. And is that something that Carlson assists with? And Kevin or Joe, I'd be happy to let you two take that question if you'd like to address that at this time.
I would say we can participate in that or have a conversation on that, and we would just make sure that we stayed in the areas in which we have expertise, and that happens along the lines of other systems we've integrated, ones we've worked with directly or indirectly. We'd like to understand the specifics of it, of course, but we would certainly be able to have a good conversation and move you in the right direction. And I think that relates a bit to that slide we talked earlier about kind of the Carlson ecosystem. So I would say the answer is yes, definitely, at least at an initial level, and then we can see where we go. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin.
Great. So I am showing my screen now, I believe, and I hope you guys can see Adaptive again. Wanted to hit reports. Again, Joe showed you some very nice reports and dashboards and with the historical information. I want to take more of a forward-thinking view, and we refer to that in the FP&A world as active planning, or being able to make decisions forward-thinking. So let me show you a couple ways that we accomplish that. So first is obviously this forward-looking forecast. And I spoke a little bit earlier about the longer periods into the future that go beyond the course of your calendar or fiscal year. This is an example of a report. Joe talked a little bit about, statement of expenses, statement of activities, statement of cash flows. So I want to kind of speak a little bit to those. So this would be more along the expense side of things. And as you can see, we're starting here in June of 2018 and moving out a year until May of 2019. Now we can go out as far as we want, but the point is this becomes a rolling forecast going out 12 months. And it's very easy to filter the periods and adjust those to whatever periods you want. So these reports are very easy to build and drag and drop. The numbers come from the worksheets that I've been showing you throughout our session today. A second example, I talked a bit about what if scenarios. So I'm going to talk a little bit here, and this is more, I guess this is an expense sheet, but it could be a full statement of activities if we brought in the revenue side of things. And I showed this to you earlier, but this shows different versions, be it the annual budget, the Q1 rolling forecast, best and worst case scenarios. And we can obviously create math operations between these, if we wanted to have 4 additional columns to add and subtract and divide, add and subtract the differences and so forth. We'd be able to do this for also cash flow, statement of cash flows. Joe talked a little bit about that as well. And then finally, the issue of board reporting. And what I will show you here is something that we do as an ability to create board reporting. Let me kind of go back to home base here. This is called Office Connect. What it allows us to do is take those budget and forecast numbers that we've been showing you and to bring them out into reports. Could, of course, include actual numbers as well to create what I will call board reporting. I've got that very nice format, or it's a format that the board is comfortable with and used to seeing and they like to see, and when they like the information we provide. We want to do it more effectively with an eye to the future. So Office Connect allows us to do that. We can literally upload the formats that are currently being used and then tie those into Adaptive. So you saw this earlier. These are the numbers that are coming from Adaptive. These are the numbers, of course, and these are the time periods. And this is very easy to update the dates. You'll see this goes from March of 18 and has March of 2017 prior year. I can simply change the date right here, meaning these are very flexible. And when it's time to do the new report for the new period, literally this is all I have to do, bring across the numbers. And Joe's going to talk a little bit more about integration, and this will refresh. I'm just timed out here, and I submit. And this will refresh and we'll have all the new periods here instantly, like so. So this allows us statement of financial position, statement of cash flows, and again, we can forecast cash flow as well. So different forms of reporting, different ways to bring the data out and share it and have other folks consume it. And obviously dashboards is another way that we've shown a lot of, just that some folks like to see it more in a picture as opposed to, in the form of, rows and numbers. And then we've also talked a lot about metrics today and KPIs. So with that, I'm going to pass the ball back to Joe.
Thanks, Kevin. Hopefully you can see my screen with my internet.
We can.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to really talk about, due to we are getting to the end of the webinar, I want to make sure that we do talk to the integrations. So some people I've spoken with, they have a very broad definition of integrations. Integrations is not download a report from one system, manipulate it, and import it into another system. That's not integrations. That leads you to have errors. You can accidentally leave off a column when you're cutting and pasting. You can accidentally delete a field or change a number in a certain field, and now all of a sudden you're not integrated. So it's not truly integration unless it's automated integration using a product such as DataBlend. And that integration can be two-way. It can be bring actuals from Sage Intacct into Adaptive Insights, and then it can be bring budgets that have been created and forecasts that have been created in Adaptive to Sage Intacct. Depending on where your users are, what systems your users are using, where you have your licenses, you may want to do that. You may not. It depends on your specific scenario. And again, that's something that we would offer some suggestions of what the best practice would be. Another point I'd like to make is that we've been talking a lot about Adaptive and Intacct, but that is not the only things that we integrate with both Adaptive Insights and Sage Intacct. We've integrated many solutions with both of them, and I will talk to them in not the next slide, the one after that, when we are going over some use cases. So I think the next slide is you, Kevin, talking about the...
Sure. Yes, and this is something we started early on, and I think I mentioned we'd circle back as we come for full circle this afternoon. And I think what Joe said highlights it nicely. We've certainly talked about Sage Intacct, Adaptive, and DataBlend, but the term we use around Carlson a lot is data sources, and Joe referenced that in this example, in this use case that we truly use in our systems, Salesforce and Nexonia, but as Joe indicated, other systems. And I think the best in class is it resulted with the question and the term that's been used today are good examples. And we are successfully able to integrate just about any other solution. We've done quite a lot of them, and obviously we evaluate on a case-by-case basis, which allows us to get best in class information timely. And what Joe talked about, a true full integration. Joe, got some use case examples, I believe.
Yep. So here's some use case examples that we've come across. So the first two I've already talked about, bringing actual GL detail and GL balances from Sage Intacct into Adaptive Insights. The next one was the forecasting and budgeting, bringing it back into Sage Intacct. Actually, I guess that's the first three. So another pretty common one is OpenAir. OpenAir is pretty widely used, mostly in the for-profit world, but I've seen it a few cases in the not-for-profit world for time entry. So that we've integrated in sales orders, and we've integrated the OpenAir into Sage Intacct, either to do the billing, if it's just time entry, they're doing an OpenAir, or bring the time entry and the invoices in if they're billing out of OpenAir. So we've done both of that. And then the last example I think is the most relatable to everyone on the call today, and that is pledge data from either Salesforce, Razor's Edge, Bloomerang, Orange Leap, any of those systems we can integrate with Sage Intacct and bring over that data, whether it's your pledges, donations, whatever the case may be. One last bullet point I'd like to throw in here that isn't on here is payroll. Every organization, no matter what they do, has payroll. So we can integrate many of your payroll systems as long as the data can be pulled out of those systems, whether it be through APIs or reports. We can actually automate that and bring that into Sage Intacct. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Mike for questions.
Excellent. I did just receive another question via private message, which states, how long is the implementation process with both Sage Intacct and Adaptive Insights, and can it be implemented at once together?
So Joe, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah,
That's what I was going to suggest.
Kevin. Please.
I've
done a couple implementations now at this, or should I say, I'm doing a couple implementations now where we're doing Adaptive and Intacct at the same time. So it is possible. One of them is going a little more smoothly than other, and it's strictly based on the staff that the person has on their end. The one that is going more smoothly has a full-fledged FP&A and an accounting staff, and they all can dedicate the time. The other one, it is a much smaller organization where they only have one person in their finance and accounting department doing everything from AP to AR to the financial reporting. And that one is a much bigger challenge for her to implement both at the same time. So it is possible, depending on the amount of time and staff that you have available to dedicate. And that also answers or starts to answer your other part of your question, is about how long would it take to implement both of them. So that's determined by two major factors. One of them being the amount of staff and time that you can dedicate, and two being which modules are you implementing. I can speak to Intacct a lot more in depth than I can with Adaptive, but Intacct has a lot of different modules. If you are strictly importing the core modules, so AP, AR, general ledger, cash management, and not implementing fixed assets, allocations, purchasing, if you're not doing those extra, then you can implement them in a much quicker time span. So the core itself is the most common that people implement first, and then they decide to down the line to add additional ones on, usually, but not all the time. That generally takes, on average, I'd say about 3 months, as long as the staff being involved in implementation can actually dedicate some time every week to the project.
So relative to Adaptive, and I'll be brief because I think a lot of Joe's points are well taken and very similar. I think it's a function of staffing. A rule of thumb I would use top of head is very similar to what Joe mentioned, which would be 3 months for Adaptive. Could be less, could be more. I think doing them simultaneously, I would agree with Joe's comment. I think the key is just that you capture the structure effectively on both sides, which is really what today's been about. What we would do, of course, is put together a project plan for each and or both of those and sequence them. And we always do that anyway, so that we can get to the right sequence and the right deliverables on the right time based upon where you are in your planning cycle and your budgeting cycle and so forth. So we hope that helps.
Excellent. And while we'd like to take some more calls, I do want to be aware of everyone's time. We have gone past the 45 minutes. So with that being said, if there are additional questions that do come up, or you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation about either Sage Intacct or Adaptive Insights and or both, my contact information is below. Happy to involve Kevin and Joe in the conversation, as they are, of course, experts in the field, and would love to hear from you more on your current processes and methodologies, and how moving to a system like Sage Intacct or Adaptive might benefit your organization. With that being said, thank you everyone for joining us today. And do want to mention, if you are attending the AICPA nonprofit conference coming up, please stop by booth 514. Myself and my associate Guy DeRosier will be there on behalf of Carlson Management Consulting, and would love to meet you in person. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and look forward to continued conversations. Have a great day.